Today we're going to look at writing humour. So this is an introduction to writing humour with the help of Detective Gretel, yes, that Gretel, who is the star of my series of comic crime historical fantasies. And we're going to have a look and see how we write comedy in a book. Writing humour is a very big topic. So the introduction is just going to take a little look at the elements that go into writing humour in a book. And I think it'll be helpful to look at examples of those, so we're going to use my books, of course. But I'm also going to give you an activity at the end where you can have a go yourself at writing some humour using what we've learned in this little video. So this is a basic introduction, no need to panic. We will look at, as I say, what main elements are the things that we use when we're writing humour. What do we rely on? What techniques can we employ? And we'll just have a little overview of those. And I'll read you some examples from my books, and then you'll have the activity at the end. So what are the main elements that make up humorous writing? The first one of these is physical humour. We probably think of things like sitcoms or really sort of slapstick films or pantomime, things where people are falling over, pratfalls, all that sort of stuff. Physical humour can be very active. It can really bring a dynamic feel to your story. It can also be about the physicality of the characters, so it might just be their physical attributes as well as what they're actually doing. So physical humour is one of the elements. Another one is surprise, and surprise, surprisingly, is not always just a sort of boom surprise. It's also the surprise of finding something not where it's supposed to be, the surprise of putting a fish out of water story into play. So you have a character who's not supposed to be there. Surprise of things going in a different direction from the one that you were expecting. So it's not always just like a jump scare type comedic surprise, it's also that element of surprise. So that's another one, is surprise. Another element is obviously dialogue. Witty dialogue is the pinnacle that we all aspire to when we're writing humour and comedy, and we really want something to come off the page. We want to put witty words in the mouths of our characters, so dialogue is another obvious element. Then we have jokes. You can actually put jokes in your books. These can be jokes that the characters are telling each other. These can be visual jokes. Actual jokes are perhaps use the least of all the elements that we use to write comedy, but still perfectly valid, still can be useful. Okay. Then there's the situation. The term sitcom comes from situation. It is where you put people in a situation that is built for comedy, where you can see that things are going to happen, they're going to be funny, or that they've come into that situation and now they've got to get themselves out of it, and that getting out of it is going to be funny. A situation is usually active, and certainly escaping from it or going through it is active, and that action allows you many more possibilities with your humorous writing too. So situation is another element. Okay, a very popular one with old plays, I mean going back forever, is misunderstanding. All the bedroom farces you've ever seen with people going in and out of doors and hiding people and people not knowing what the other one's talking about, and names that don't quite match, and so people get tricked out like that. The ways that the characters are misunderstanding each other. The reader doesn't misunderstand, the reader understands very well, and we can see that misunderstanding happening. We can see that the people are getting further and further away from each other in understanding what's going on, and there can be a lot of humour in that. So misunderstanding is another key element. The other main element, of course, is character. Your characters themselves can be funny. Now, obviously, if you're writing a dramatic book or a serious book, you're not going to have major comic characters, but I would point you back to Shakespeare here. Even some of his more heavy-going, but some of his darker plays have comedic elements in some of the characters, and they're a little bit of light relief, a little bit of light and dark, a little bit of change of tone so that the darkness is more noticeable. It doesn't hurt to have some comedy. It's quite difficult to work that into a more serious book. If you're writing a comedy, obviously you're going to have some comic characters. Again, they can't all be clowns. You need the contrast. You need the straight man, if you like, to the people who are going to have the the funnier elements to them. But certainly if you're writing comedy or writing humour into your books, the gift of a comic character will go a long way, and we'll certainly look at these in my Gretel book. So just to recap then, we've got character, situation, misunderstanding, surprise, language, physical humour, dialogue and jokes, and I will put these in a little thingy at the end so you've got them all. And in other videos we will certainly come back to these in greater depth, because they could all stand a lot of exploring, and we'll have some fun with them, and I'll give you more activities for them. For now I'm going to give you examples of how I've used some of those elements in my writing, and then at the end I will give you your activity. So let's have a look. So the first bit I'm going to read you is from book 4 in my series. This is The Sorcerer's Appendix. This is book 4 in the Detective Gretel series. What's happened here, not to give too much away, is that Gretel and her brother Hans, as I call him, have found themselves in a very unusual bar, and there's about to be a bar brawl caused largely by Hans. Hans is a character who is really there, in theory, to help Gretel, but all he does really is hinder. She solves crimes in spite of her brother's help. He means well, but well, Hans is Hans. Anyway, I'm going to read you a little bit where Hans is trying to make a bad situation better and makes it infinitely worse. I think this is an example of physical humour, of a situation, and of the comedy coming from the characters. So there's some of several elements in there. Hans felt duty-bound to do something. It might have been that that something was a thing of some merit, of some cunning, of some guile, such as he had never shown in his life before. Or it might have been that that something was something less, something somewhat unhelpful, something somehow more Hans. No one would ever find out, for as he drew himself up to speak, tucking his thumbs in his highly respectable lapels and puffing out his stomach, he took a step back and to the side, the better to address the company. Alas, there was no back, and very little side to be had, so that instead he trod squarely and weightily on the unshod back paw of Baby Bear. The great bear roared. Hans sprang forward, barrelling into Scurvy Sam, who shoved him into the arms of an other outlaw. This burly specimen of the criminal classes drew back his arm and threw a meaty fist at Hans's head, but Hans, still off balance from all the barrelling and shoving, teetered sideways and downward at that moment, landing heavily on the sawdusted floor. The punch found its mark instead in the eye of the woodsman, whereupon both dwarves leapt from their bar stools to defend their friend. The entire room fell to brawling. There being insufficient space for a private fight, the hitting spread like a contagion the length of the bar, so that soon everyone was punching or biting or throttling someone else. The pianist struck up a suitably lively tune. The barman took out a cudgel with which to defend his wares. The previous chatter was now replaced with oaths, curses and shouts. Gretel dropped to the floor beside her brother. "Hans, keep low and follow me," she instructed, turning to scuttle on hands and knees through the lurching and stamping feet. Okay, so that is just an example of using physical comedy to really show something funny that's happening. It's a situation that's been building up. Obviously taking comedy out of context is always less impactful, but I think you get the idea that is very much physical comedy. There's lots of falling, there's literally people pratfalling, but it's also about character. It's about how Hans is standing up to do something sensible and make something better, and he makes something worse, and then it's about the sense of the ridiculous. He and his sister, who I have to point out at this point, were dressed as a prostitute and a vicar through a very long set of circumstances, have to make their exit from this bar by crawling under all the brawling people. So that's the Sorcerer's Appendix, and that's an example of physical humour. Okay, so the next one I'm going to show you comes from Gretel and the Case of the Missing Frog Prince. As you see, I like my puns. I'm sorry about that. It's probably a low form of humour, but it's another use of language. So Gretel and the Case of the Missing Frog Prince. It's necessary for Hans and Gretel to leave Gerstenstadt, their little town, quite quickly. They need tickets from the stagecoach. Gretel has a lot to do. There's a lot riding on this. There's another case to be solved, and she's about to send Hans to buy the tickets. And I've got two little extracts to read you here from this, a couple of scenes apart. And I think this is a use of dialogue and character for humour. Okay. Gretel snatched up paper and quill from the chaos on the desk and beckoned to Hans. Don't talk nonsense, she told him. There simply isn't time. Here, scratch out a letter to your good friend Wolfie Pretzel. Inform him we are coming to visit and should be there by Friday lunchtime at the latest. We are? We will? Hans bent to his task, tongue out, forming each word with maddening slowness. Gretel couldn't watch. Post that on your way to buying the tickets, she said, extracting a slim roll of notes from her corset and handing it to him. You'll need this. Now, just to make quite sure we are planning the same trip, what are you going to do, to whom, with what, and when? Oh, good, a quiz. I like quizzes. Let me see now. I'm writing to Wolfie to tell him we're coming to stay. He'll be thrilled. Thrilled skinny. You know he loves company, does good old Wolfie. Not many people bother with him, can't think why. And then, Gretel prodded. And then I'm posting the letter when I go out to buy 2 tickets to Nuremberg on the evening stage. Very good, Hans. And then I'm... He hesitated. His eyes darted back and forth and finally crossed as he tried to recall his instructions. He shook his head. No, it's no good, it's gone. What am I doing next? What I always tell you to do when you've bought tickets, remember? You come straight home. Got that? Ha, of course, I come straight home. Right, I'll pack. Gretel headed towards the stairs. She'd not got halfway up when Hans's plaintive question reached her. So I don't stop off at the inn for a fortifying glass of something just to set me up for the journey and whatnot, do I not? Hans, Gretel snapped. Post letter, buy tickets, return home. Do not stray from the path. But I'm relying on you, Hans. So off he goes to do this. Gretel goes up to pack. And a bit later, she hears the front door slam. Obviously, Hans has returned. Hans, is that you? She hurried to the top of the stairs to find a rather out-of-breath Hans steadying himself on the newel post at the bottom. You look puffed, brother dear. Is anything wrong? Hans shook his head, panting his way through his words. Not wrong, no, just not entirely as right as one might have liked. He sat down heavily on the second stair. Gretel descended to sit next to him. Let's have it, she said. I did as instructed, he assured her, taking out a worryingly grey handkerchief with which to dab the perspiration from his brow. Posted the letter, proceeded to the offices of the stagecoach company, at some speed by the look of you. At that point I was still moving at a sensible pace, didn't wish to attract unwanted attention, do you see? I can only applaud your thinking, Hans. Feel free, applaud as much as you like. He waved his hanky at her before stuffing it back in his pocket. Gretel ignored this. And then you bought the tickets. Well, Gretel heard a sickly glugging noise and recognised it to be the sound of her heart sinking. You didn't take a short detour to the inn, by any chance? Hans looked convincingly shocked. I am wounded that you might think such a thing. No, I reached my destination swift and sober. Excellent. Sadly, there were no tickets available on this evening's stage. Not so excellent. What there were, however, were tickets for this afternoon's departure. Much more excellent, said Gretel. Of course I told the clerk I didn't want them. And there goes excellence scuttling over the horizon with its tail between its legs, said Gretel. No, seats on this evening's stage. That's what I wanted, not this afternoon's. You're telling me you didn't buy them? Hang it all, Gretel, I know how long it takes you to pack and powder your nose and whatnot. Can't expect a woman to be ready for the off in a few skinny hours. I understand that. And you also understand that if we do not leave Gerstenstadt this very day, Strudel will have me thrown in a smelly cell on a murder charge, which will be fitting, as I will have strangled you with my bare hands by then because you didn't buy the tickets. Fortunately, I do. Hans grinned, pulling 2 stagecoach tickets from his waistcoat and waving them under his sister's nose. I don't know whether to kiss you or kick you. We don't have time for either. Okay, so that's character obviously is playing a huge part there. The dialogue on its own would not be as effective, but because we know the characters by now, by the time we get there, we can sort of anticipate what might happen, what might go wrong, and the idea in the humour is that we think it's going to go wrong, and it does slightly differently, so there's a surprise element there, but then it sort of goes right again. And actually what we don't expect is that Hans is having a bit of a joke with his sister, because usually he's quite desperate to please her and has enough going on in his adult little mind without trying to make jokes at the same time. But he's a little bit sort of playing with her there. But it's the dialogue, it's the language in that gives us the humour. So this extract is taken from Once Upon a Crime, which is actually the second book in the series. It's the sort of prequel, if you like, to the first one. And this is where my torturer, my unusual torturer comes in, Herr Schmerz. The name Schmerz means pain, so he's called Mr. Pain. And he is in the torture chamber of the big Schloss, the castle, and Gretel has been taken there because the king thinks she needs torturing to get some information out of her, basically. So she's in a bit of a pickle, and let's see how this goes. A burly man in leather vest and trousers, his arms a wealth of tattoos, stepped from the shadows, hand outstretched. Schmerz is the name, he said. Pain is the game. Very pleased to meet you. Gretel found herself shaking his hand. The soldiers looked uneasy. Don't worry, nothing to fear. I'm sure our latest accused here has always been told not to bite the hand that bleeds you. Ha ha. He laughed uproariously at his own joke. Gretel was dumbfounded. There was no doubt about where she was, just as there was no question as to the man's purpose in life. She was standing in a torture chamber, and she was shaking hands with the man whose job it would be to torture her. The physique fitted, the slick muscles, the menacingly shaven head, the violent body art, but the demeanour of Herr Schmerz seemed to belong to someone else altogether. Even his laugh was genuinely cheerful, so that one felt the desire to join in, to laugh along with him. Gretel thought this might be some sort of new psychological tactic for weakening a victim's resolve. It hardly seemed necessary. Looking at the terrible instruments of agony that filled the room, she felt all her resolve dissolve instantly. Let me show you round, Fraulein. Give you the guided tour. No extra charge. Let's face it, the charge against you is bad enough already. Ha ha. Right, let's start with good old Sally Stretch here. A bit outdated, some might say. A little last century, but reliable. He patted the rack affectionately. Always gives good results, does old Sally. Now here, he moved on a pace or two. Here's something special. Oh yes, took delivery of this only last month. Quite looking forward to trying it out, don't mind telling you. He paused to frown at Gretel as if sizing up her suitability for the machine. She felt obliged to form the question, what does it do? Oh, well, I'm glad you asked me that. You lift this iron bar here and the subject, that's you, the subject lies beneath it, see? He indicated the where and the how as he spoke. Gretel nodded, powerless to resist such enthusiasm. Then the operator, that's me, well, he replaces the bar like so. Now we employ this body plate fitted with over 100 spikes, tempered steel, look at that, lovely workmanship. And the plate lowers over the subject, that'd be, he waited. Me? Said a small voice Gretel barely recognised as her own. You, indeed, cotton's on fast this one, he said to the soldiers, no flies on her. Well, no flies now, of course later it'll be different. Anyhow, where was I? Oh yes, the plate lowers over the body of the subject and is tightened by the turning of these two screws here and here. You see? You see how that works? He straightened up, nodding slowly. That's your impressive machine, that is, he said. Gretel decided the surreal element of having such a cheerful torturer was indeed beginning to enfeeble her wits. She recalled an ancient Turkish punishment in which the victim could choose between having his testicles crushed betwixt bricks or betwixt silk cushions. Quite what crime the wretched person would have to have committed to warrant such treatment she couldn't bring to mind. All she knew was that she was starting to detect a worryingly ancient Turkish flavour to things, and she did not wish to be a part of it. I'm a little confused, she said softly. Happy to answer questions, ask away, said Herr Schmerz. And so she goes on to ask him how come that she hasn't had a trial and nobody's really asked her any proper questions before torturing her, and so he goes on. And he actually offers them all toffees. They were chewing toffees 5 minutes later. The thing is, the situation could be set up for comedy, could be set up for drama, whatever you like. It's a torture chamber. But the surprising element is the nature and character of the torturer. So that's using surprise for humour as well. Okay? Right, so now we come to your turn to have a go at writing a little bit of humour. This is just a little activity you can use to try out some of these elements and you know, nobody's going to read it. You're not going to try and sell it, just have a go. You throw them away afterwards, delete them, burn them, do what you like. But the point is to just experiment, all right? So what I want you to do is come up with a little basic scene from which to try and have your comedic moment. If it helps, I'll give you a little scene. Imagine a seaside with an ice cream van parked up, and there's a short queue for the ice creams. It's a lovely hot sunny day, there are seagulls, there's children running around, you can hear the waves, it's all very pleasant. And in this queue there's a young man and a young woman, and they don't know each other, but they've seen each other and they're quite interested, they quite fancy each other. And they're in this queue buying ice creams. And as we watch them, the scene goes on, the girl gets to the front of the queue and she buys 2 ice creams, and she turns around, she has an ice cream in each hand. And it's at that moment that the young man decides to make some sort of contact with this woman. He can't let her just walk away, she's too lovely, so he wants to say something. That's your scene. And what I want you to do is try and just write what happens next, okay? You've got your pretty girl standing there with her ice creams, you've got the young man there deciding he's going to be brave, he's not going to let her get away, he's going to try and talk to her. You're at the seaside, you've got all those other things going on, there are kites and people on bicycles and dogs and lots of people and things happening, sunshine. It's up to you to make it funny what happens next. Now obviously we don't have the background here, we don't have a context, and we don't have characters that we know, so it's going to be a bit more difficult to make use of that, but see if you can go through the different elements that we've looked at and try them out. Sometimes you can try combinations, so you're going to use dialogue, then the next time you might try and use surprise, then you might have a go at using misunderstanding. What else we're going to go through? The physical humour is a very obvious one. I think that's quite a good setup for physical humour. So write them using the different elements and sometimes different combinations of the elements and see how you get on, okay? So let us know in the comments how you do. Tell us your experiences of writing humour and whether or not you hold back because you think it's too difficult. Do you like it when you come across humour in a book that isn't a comedy? Do you think sometimes it's difficult to get that tone right? We'll look at all these things in more depth, but let us know in the comments what you think. Don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and tell me what other sort of things about writing humour that you'd like to see in the next videos, because we'll do ones in more depth and have different examples as well. And we will look at writing humour for screenplays later on too. So good luck with your writing.